Miami Condo Mondays is a live podcast on the first workday of the week at 4 p.m. South Florida time. The program features former journalist and current Wall Street consultant Peter Zaleski of the Miami Condo Investing Club and former lender and veteran condo broker Jenny Huertas of CVRRealty.com. Recorded weekly in greater downtown Miami, this 1-hour discussion will provide a refreshing and sometimes controversial perspective on the state of the South Florida condo market from a pair of seasoned real estate professionals who do not always agree. The program won't tell you what to think about the South Florida condo market, but will give you something to think about before buying, selling, taking listings, or financing units. This podcast is not authorized by the Miami real estate industry and will quite possibly annoy many of its figureheads. Welcome to this week's episode of Miami Condo Mondays, broadcast live on the social media accounts of Peter Zaleski and Jenny Huertas. Happy Monday, Miami. This is Miami Condo Mondays. It's a real estate podcast, a broadcast between myself and my co-host and partner, Jenny Huertas from CVR Realty. Check out our website, cvrrealty.com. I'm Peter Zaleski. I'm a condo consultant. I'm also the founder of the Miami Condo Investing Club. What are we going to talk about today, this week? Remember, every Monday at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we're going to talk condos. We're going to give you something to think about. We won't tell you what to think, but we'll raise all kinds of questions in your mind, try to give you some sort of talking points going forward, and maybe you're in the market. Maybe you're getting ready to come down here for the winter buying season, which begins next week, and you're trying to do your research, trying to get everything all set, all locked and loaded to be able to go forward. Hopefully some of the details we're going to be talking about today are going to add to it. Why? Because we're talking about maintenance fees. We're talking about the critical aspect of maintenance fees. We always hear down here in South Florida that South Florida is a great place to invest because it's so much cheaper than the likes of San Francisco, than New York, than anywhere else in the world. Well, there's a brand new report that just came out, and it deals with maintenance fees and it compares and contrasts. Where does Miami, which is one market, where does Fort Lauderdale and Palm Beach, which is another market, how does it compare to everything else in North America? And it's all coming from a report put out by FirstService Residential, which is a large property management company that operates in Canada and the United States. And we're going to be talking about the report. Last week, if you watched the podcast, we got into what was going on in the Fort Lauderdale Palm Beach area, which is, again, one market, the Miami market, and as well as Tampa. Now we're going to broaden that perspective, and we're going to look at what's going on North America-wide. And we will give you the numbers as to how does South Florida compare to the rest of the country. So if, in fact, you hear that Miami is so much cheaper to invest, Fort Lauderdale is so much cheaper to invest, good question to ask him is, what about the maintenance fees? And we're going to give you those maintenance fees. So that's a long way of saying, Jenny Huertas, how are you? Happy last Monday of the summer buying season, which began way back in May. And here we are on the brink of going into winter buying season next week when November gets here. So what's going on, Jenny?
Everything's great. Everything's good. Happy Monday. Happy to be here again. I can't believe it's been a while already. And this is so good for us because we also learn a lot of stuff. When we investigate what we're going to talk about every week, we also being always current on what is happening in every week, like in the weekly weeks, like a weekly basis is really good for everybody, I guess.
Well, Jenny, one thing we're going to be talking about next week, just to give the audience some foreshadowing, we're going to be talking about the Federal Reserve, the Federal Open Markets Committee. They're meeting this week, and they're going to decide the fate of interest rates again. If you guys remember, going back to December, that was the last time they had cut interest rates. Then we ran about 9 months with no interest rate cuts. And remember, the Federal Reserve's got two mandates. One is inflation at or below 2%. The other one is maximum employment. And for 42 straight months, the Federal Reserve was focused on getting inflation under control. Because remember, during the pandemic, we had supply chain issues. A lot of people had a bunch of cash to burn. There weren't enough people working. There weren't enough essential workers. Therefore, everything went up in price, and inflation actually hit 9.1%. Well, fast forward, after Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve had worked to chip away at inflation. They got it down to 2.3% back in April, and ever since then, partially due to the Liberation Day tariffs. Remember, before Liberation Day on April the 2nd of 2025, when President Trump did a pivot and went from globalization and free trade to suddenly let's start tariffing everything coming into the United States, which ultimately is going to be paid by the consumer and or the importer, the company bringing it in. They're the ones that are going to pay it. So before Liberation Day, it was 4% tariff across the board, according to Morgan Stanley. Since then, it averages north of 17%. And because of that, we're starting to see the numbers increase because there's simply tariffs. Initially, it's being swallowed or absorbed by the companies bringing it in, companies like Walmart, companies like General Motors. But according to Jerome Powell of the Federal Reserve, we're not going to see all these these tariffs kick in and be implemented till the beginning of 2027. So we're just in the early stages. So what's going on this week when the Federal Reserve Board meets? Well, we just got inflation numbers last week. They were a week late because the federal government shut down as well
Still
as
shut down.
yeah, it's still shut down. But what do we find? We saw that inflation actually hit 3%. So back in April, 2.3%. As of last week, 3%. We're going in the wrong direction, Jenny, because we got to get it at 2 or below, according to the Federal Reserve. But in August, Jerome Powell got some shocking news, and he said, you know what? Despite the fact we were focused on inflation, let's just drop the ball on that, and let's pivot over and shift to jobs. Why? Because job market is it's throwing off some very interesting signs. Part of it has to do with layoffs that occurred because of Doge. Other parts of it have to do with just the slowing economy, the unpredictability of tariffs, and all that together is forcing many companies to sit on the sidelines and simply not hire and pull back on any kind of investments, which in theory should be able to contribute to the job market. Now, Jenny, here's the thing, and this is what they're going to decide this week. So you got inflation running at 3%. And you got a job market, which you don't know what's going on because the federal government is shut down, so they're not pulling data for this week. So how do you make a decision going forward? And that is the question that's going to be put in front of the Federal Reserve Open Market Committee this week when they decide, do we cut another 25 basis points, which is what they did on September 17th, or do we sit on the sidelines and not do anything because we only got one of the two data points? Remember, we got inflation, but we don't have job numbers. Or do we raise rates because inflation suddenly get out of control? And that is a conundrum that we're faced with right now. And that's what we'll be talking about next week. I don't know if you want to make a comment about that before we go on to our focus on the maintenance fees, but I want everybody to be primed and knowing what's really coming this week.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you something. I really would hate to be the head of the federal right now because such a huge decision. It's like he's not gonna win either way. So we'll see. It's gonna be interesting to see what's happening. In the meantime, we're still in the shutdown. I was reading on NAR that they prompt all the realtor associations of the country to send letters to the congressman for them to actually go and work and get into an agreement because the deals are really suffering a lot of dead deals, delays, etc. So I was reading, interesting enough that let's say that because of the shutdown, we losing something like trillions of dollars, and so the debt went up. The stock market is up and
Flying.
booming.
Stock market is on
Yeah,
fire.
and you say, what is it? And they say that they're trying to focus on the corporate earnings instead of the political situation, regardless of the government is shut down, and they are counting on Federal Reserve cuts, which is very interesting. I didn't know this. And in the meanwhile, the billionaire's wealth has grown in the same percentage and hit over $1 trillion. So that's so interesting for Powell to see what he's gonna do. I can wait for next week.
Well, no, it's not next week. It's this week. They're
It's this
meeting.
week.
Yeah, they're
Well,
meeting this week,
we're gonna talk
and
about it next week.
next week we're going to talk about it. But the other thing that's going on too is all of these big tech companies, they call them the Magnificent Seven. There's seven tech companies, whether it be Google or Meta or Microsoft or whatever. Many of them are coming out with their earnings this week, so that's going to give a good indication too what's going on with the economy. And remember, when you cut interest rates, housing activity goes up. When you raise interest rates, housing activity goes down.
Mhm.
And our condo market has been sluggish. It's been suffering. We got too much supply, not enough transactions, and increasingly we're seeing pricing falling. Now, I am seeing that the Realtor Association is starting to get a little bit excited about this. Why? Because they're definitely going on the offensive and trying to put out good news. They're trying to spread the Kool-Aid along to everybody and have them suck it down and think that everything is fine and there's not going to be a problem. So this is something we're going to see probably ratcheted up as we get into the winter buying season, which again begins in November and it'll ultimately run through the end of April. And Jenny, for what it's worth, as we sit here today recording this podcast, the 30-year fixed rate mortgage coming in at 6.19. 6.19. That is based on the anticipation that there will be a Federal Reserve interest rate
Mhm.
cut this week, as well as another one in December. Remember, the Federal Open Markets Committee, they call it the FOMC. They don't meet in November because we have our Thanksgiving holiday. So in theory, it looks like Wall Street is betting that we're going to have an interest rate cut. And one other point I would tell you, the stock market is humming for two reasons right now. In particular, last Friday it was humming because inflation was expected to be 3.1%, but it only was 3%. So therefore, it was great news. So we only went from 2.9 to 3. We didn't go to 3.1, which is what Wall Street had anticipated. And now, because President Trump is over in Asia, there's expectations that we could finally get one of these trade deals with China worked out at the threat of hitting them with the 100% tariffs if a deal isn't worked out. So, this is some of the uncertainty that we've all been
Yeah.
talking about. This is why when we went in the summer buying season, we were talking about a summer of paralysis by analysis, and that's pretty much what's played out. And that, I think, is why the Realtor Association is really going on the offensive and trying to spread the gospel of how great the market is, even though we got an immigration issue. We have uncertainty about the overall economy. We have certainty about jobs, but we might be getting interest rate cuts. So that's kind of the climate we sit in, Jenny. But one thing we know what maintenance fees are coming in at. Maintenance fees are a critical part of anybody buying into a
Yeah.
condominium. What does a maintenance fee do? It basically covers everything. It gives you a turnkey scenario if you are a condo buyer. So you'll walk in there, you buy a condo, and like Jenny said last week, if you want to suddenly go on a trip for 6 months and just leave, as long as you're paying your maintenance fees, you got nothing to worry about. The association, the
Mhm.
people in place will manage everything. If there's a hurricane coming, like there is right now going towards Jamaica, and hopefully it bypasses Jamaica somehow, some way, and
Yeah.
it doesn't get as hit as is what they're saying. Well, if you wanted to just leave and say a storm is coming, the condo association is probably pretty much going to take care of everything on the outside. As long as you're paying your bills and everything on the interior, that's all covered by the association. So that will be valet. That will be the landscaping. That will be the engineers, people doing the mechanical, the electrical, the plumbing. That'll be the cost of the nice scent when you walk in. That'll be the flowers you're going to see on the front desk. That'll be the cleaning of the swimming pool. So the maintenance fees cover all of that. It also covers the insurance of the building, not within your unit, but the overall building covers the property taxes as well. It covers any kind of money that's necessary in order to maintain the building. Remember, we had that Surfside condo collapse back in June of 2021 where nearly 100 people died and he had a $1 billion settlement paid out to the families of the victims. Well, all of that is incorporated in paying your maintenance fees. So it's important to understand what your maintenance fees are when you're going in, whether you're buying to be a primary resident or you're buying as a so-called investment. You got to know what your numbers are. Property taxes are one thing, maintenance fees another, and then your utilities, and then if you got any kind of debt service. Those are the big ones. And it's been difficult for the longest time to figure out maintenance fees. But because of FirstService Residential and their report called the Benchmark, and we're looking at the 2025 Highrise Edition. And by the way, they say don't use it as a benchmark, but they call it benchmark, so go figure. But anyways, we're going to get through the numbers and we're going to compare Miami as well as the market of Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, which they combined into one. So we got two markets, Miami. Other market is Fort Lauderdale / Palm Beach. Why they call it that, I don't know. But we're going to get into that and we're going to compare it to the rest of North America. Jenny, give me a second to breathe because I've just been rattling around. Give the audience some kind of feedback about maintenance fees, how exceptional they are to the overall equation, how people maybe overlook them, how people can maybe understand a condo and how it's running based on the maintenance fees. Can you sort of talk to that?
Yes, I mean, there is so many different categories for buildings. Buildings that have zero or no amenities. no pool, just the basic garage, if so. And then when you have a pool, a concierge, people who receive your packages, every little thing, water, hot water, sometimes includes cable, like in my building, that includes also basic cable and water. So it depends. It's just you have to really pay attention to what is included, what is not, as well as what is the status of the building. We had talked about this before, but as far as reserves, if they do have good reserves, they have to have it now. It's mandatory. And as the studies and the future jobs they're going to do, meaning special assessments, hopefully just they can use their old reserves and it's nothing major, but most cases translate into special assessments, which is an extraordinary fee that you pay besides your regular maintenance every month. So yes, it's very diverse. It depends on where you want to be and what kind of comfort you want to have when you buy a condo. Also, it translates into, when you have something like that, then it's more desirable for some buyers. So it's just that there is something for everybody.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. In terms of the special assessments, think of a special assessment kind of like you got your budget, you're operating, maybe you allocate some money every week from your paycheck or however you're getting paid for groceries, maybe for going out, maybe, I don't know, you like to play Dungeons and Dragons and there's a fee. I got a buddy who's a big Dungeons and Dragons fan. And he takes his kids and stuff and, they got to pay to be part of the club. I don't know, whatever your fees are. Now say suddenly maybe you get, your car breaks down and you need to suddenly come up with some cash to fix the car so you could drive to the Dungeons and Dragons session on Saturdays. Well, that would be an example of a special assessment. That's something you didn't see coming. You didn't anticipate it. Now, lo and behold, you have to go and you have to come up with the cash in order to cover it
Mhm.
so you can get to the Dungeons and Dragons example.
Yes.
So that would be a special assessment, but they've increasingly become a bigger and bigger issue because of the Surfside collapse. The legislators up in Tallahassee, when they meet since June of 2021, they've passed a series of laws, and I would argue being impressed by and influenced by insurance companies. Insurance companies don't want to insure something where they don't know what it is, they don't understand it, and therefore the legislature's required a bunch of different inspections to be done now regularly
Mhm.
statewide. And because of the statewide requirement, we're starting to find a bunch of stuff. It's kind of like if you don't look, you're not going to find it, but because they're lifting up so many rocks, they're finding all these different things.
Yeah.
Let me make it real simple for you. Every 10 years in the state of Florida now, a condominium, it's going to have something called a structural integrity reserve study. Structural integrity, which is let's look at the building. Reserve, which is okay, how much is it going to cost to fix it? What's the lifespan of the roof, of the facade, everything else? And then they give their report to the board of directors of that condo association. Board of directors now is required to start to collect money and earmark it. So when an issue pops up, they got the cash in order to pay for it. And all of
Yeah.
these decisions and this opinion, it's based on licensed architect or licensed engineer signing off on it. So it can't be the condo board member, which I always say, who's from New Jersey and they were a roofer and somebody told them the roof was bad, so the guy went up there or the woman went up there, they looked at the roof and they said, we don't need to do it. You used to be able to do it like that and defer. You can't do it anymore. And that's a game changer. And therefore, maintenance fees are going up. Now, on the
Yeah.
special assessment side, sometimes you get hit with something that has to be done immediately. And that would be an example like the car breaking down. Well, that's what these condos suddenly have to do. And then they
Mhm.
kick in place a special assessment. And the special assessment will add to your overall carrying costs. Now, besides every 10 years, you do the structural integrity reserve study. They also now have to do something called a milestone inspection report. It comes at year 30. This is to roll up the sleeves, get in there and really understand what's going on in the building. It's almost like the midlife crisis, if you will. We have to go in there and you have to get all kinds of extra stuff done. And inevitably, there's probably going to be a special assessment related to that
Mhm.
because prior to Surfside, a lot of associations simply used to defer because they don't want the maintenance to be very high. So now we got these two things. But here's the bottom line. Every 10 years, I would venture to guess you were getting hit with a special assessment and or an increase in maintenance fees. Why? Because you need to pay for the regular upkeep of these buildings. For the longest time, since 1963, when they established the Florida condo law, it wasn't really mandatory. You had the
Mhm.
ability to defer. And now you can't defer anymore. There's a certain wiggle room time, but generally speaking, you can't defer. And that's why maintenance fees are becoming more and more critical. So when you're shopping for real estate, I would tell you location might be important, but it's not like the realtors say. It's no longer location, location, location. Now I would tell you it's the age of the building,
as well as the maintenance fee, as well as the location. So that location, take it, throw it out the window, and start to look at all three of them. What is the maintenance fee? What is
Yeah.
the age of the building? And what is the location? Because that is the difference between having a winner and having a dog that's probably going to cost you a ton of cash, and you're going to have to give it away to get out of it.
Yes, absolutely. I believe our market, since we start really doing modern condos, like after Hurricane Andrew, that we have impact windows and all that in the newer construction, our condos are aging. They're getting older. They're getting,
Long in the tooth.
20 years plus. So we start getting, worried about trying to maintain the building the best way you can. It's like a person that takes care of themselves. The better you take care of small stuff, the better you age. It's the same with the buildings. If the building is always keeping it up, chances are that you're gonna be hit with the special assessment, but also can be lower than other buildings that never took care of the structure.